but I had to cut down these bolts, and they're spaced about 1/8 of an inch away from the cam bearing. So I know those fit good. They're at the right depth, not too shallow or too deep. All the paint marks are facing upwards, and what that does is it puts the feed hole for the lifter at the top, so it won't bleed down. Those are all torqued. I got my ARP studs in; they're bottomed out. I got some Loctite 565 on it, and just screwed the studs in and cleaned the surface. The gasket I'm using is a multi-layer shim gasket, and it's a Cometic. And the block was actually put together and measured a 4-corner deck height. Okay, so I know that those pistons are 0 decked across the board. And yes, I did double check it. So 0 deck pistons, street engine, it's getting a 40 thou gasket. If this was a race engine, I would put a 35 in there, or even a 27 thou, depending on the RPM and the use. But since this is on the street, I want that extra clearance in there. So this is getting a 40 thou gasket. I had Cometic make me a set a while back, and they've just been sitting on the shelf. But I'm gonna get that all together, and you guys can see up top, no gasket. All I do is put flange sealer right here. Put flange sealer around here. That's it. And flange sealer around the water pump. All around. So, all right, just a quick one. Now there's top and bottom to washers. I always put the rounded edge at the top. But anyways, there's a couple reasons why I put cylinder heads on standing up. And one of those reasons is because when you're going to put the head on, sometimes what will happen is you get hung up on the studs. And when it gets hung up on the studs, start tapping on it and rapping on it, and next thing you know, the head slams home and hits the head gasket. Now, if it's standing up like this, it's not going to do that. So that's one reason why I put them on like this. And that got sprayed with Rust-Oleum aluminum, and I added hardener to the Rust-Oleum and let it sit overnight. To clean the washers and the studs, I just use the transmission fluid gasoline mix. And I don't even blow them off, I just install them like that. And I also put a little dab of the ARP lube inside the nut. So when you're torquing it on, it spreads it through the threads.
Babe?
Yeah, huh?
Come have your...
Huh? Yeah, all right. Yeah, I'll have lunch. That's Veronica. When you tighten the studs, you don't actually tighten them in the block. What you're supposed to do is you bottom the stud out, and once it bottoms out, you don't torque it. You just touch the bottom of the block with the stud, and then you want to back it out 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn. You can even do 1 turn, but I like staying 1/2 to 3/4. Like the headlamp. Huh? Maybe like that. Thought the headlamp would be a nice touch for this video. These are the cheap Amazon ones. I think I got both of these for like 16 bucks or something. And they last a decent amount of time. You know, they're not going to last all day. I get it. I'd say you get a good 2 hours of use. And what I'll do is I'll run one down, till it shuts off. Take it off, put it on charge, and then I'll use the other one. I'll use the other headlamp while the other one's charging. Now, for the first few steps before I go to 40, it's collapsing that gasket. So what I usually do is I'll turn it till it gets some resistance and stop. Because I don't want to put 40 foot-pounds just on the one bolt, and it's trying to push the entire head down. So I'll just, and you'll feel it, it'll turn, and then get some resistance and stop. Turn, get some resistance, and stop. And I just do that just to collapse the gasket. And once you get to the point where it's only giving you 1/8 of a turn at a time, then I'll go for the first torque. Now I got nothing on the gasket. And if there was, I use copper coat, okay? And where I use that is in instances where if the surface was damaged and I didn't get it resurfaced, or there's some imperfections or some corrosion around some ports, I'll use it. On a new head gasket, fresh surfaces, new heads, no copper coat. I have in the past, and I've had no problems, okay? There's no problems that I've had with using copper coat on a new gasket, but why? It's just a waste. And then if you do use copper coat, use it sparingly. You don't have to paint it. Just so you miss the copper on, and that's it, because that's all you want to do. You want to get a surface on the gasket for it to seal. This already has a sealer on the gasket. So no copper coat. If by any chance there was some corrosion here and I used a brand new head, I would only copper coat the one side. If this was an older head and there's some imperfections, but the deck surface was good, then I just coat the head side. Now, if I wanted to use this gasket, I would copper coat. I have reused Cometic gaskets, and when I do that, I will put copper coat on them. And when I usually use a head gasket, it's not for something that's actually going to be in service. It's more like testing. So if I was going to tear the head off again, I would just reuse the gasket. Now, I have reused gaskets with copper coat and used them in my own personal vehicles as in service, and I've had 0 issues. So there's also that. Do I recommend it? No. But it was my vehicle. I didn't care. I needed one fast, so I did it. And to this day, it's still running. And that was years ago. So I have no problem reusing a Cometic gasket and spraying it with copper coat. The next stage is 70 foot-pounds. I'll let that sit. Now go over it again. And something I didn't explain before, another reason why I like to paint these surfaces, if they get dirty, wipe it right off. Prevents them from corroding, and they're easier to clean. And if there's runs, if there's like a run in an exposed surface, all you got to do is wet sand it. That's it. It actually looks better after you wet sand it. Because remember, that aluminum paint actually has aluminum in it. Maybe I ought to do a video on that. I should paint a flat piece of aluminum and wet sand it. It actually turns out pretty good. Now I gotta I got a new gear I got to press on to the oil pump drive. It is a new gear from, what was that company? Hughes. I got a Hughes performance gear, and I'll have to press that on and drop it in. And I got to drill this, press the pin in that they give you. This is the third time at 70. I just want to make sure they're not going to turn anymore. They're done collapsing that gasket. Losing where I'm losing my position where I left off. Back in my, let's say, younger years of being a flat rate tech. Well, the video ended up short. I ran out of storage. I did my 110 foot-pounds and felt one of the studs turn, and that's fine. It still has a half a turn before it bottoms out. And I left off with, I'm going to go over it again at 110. And I left off at when I was a flat rate tech. And when I was a flat rate tech, I didn't have a torque wrench. I had an impact and I had a breaker bar. That was my torque wrench. And since all the newer cars were torque to yield, all I had to do was stretch the bolt. So I'd run it down my impact in sequence, of course. And after I run it down with the impact, I would get the breaker bar on it and start torquing until I felt it didn't get tighter. And then when I felt it not getting tighter, I would give it an eighth of a more turn and call it done. And it just wasn't me. And old flat rate tech told me that. And I did it. And it worked. So for the longest time, I didn't have a torque wrench. Now, that was in my toolbox at work. And throughout the years, there have been many times where I wasn't flat rate tech, and I needed to get the car done and out the door, and I would use the same method. No comebacks. None. Not one. Because that's essentially what you're doing. You're stretching it. You don't need to read a torque wrench to stretch a bolt. You just need feel. So, and that's what I did. I just went by feel. And it worked. I had no issues. And it is hot today. It's getting ready to rain too, which I like, because that means there's less dust in the air. And that's usually when I build my engines, is when it rains or the humidity is really hot, really high. So that's it. I'm done with that. I'll clean up the other side, and I'll clean up the head, and I'll get the studs in and get the other side torqued on. And that'll be, after I get those heads torqued on, I'm going to flip it upside down and finish the pickup tube for the oil pump. I got to finish bending that, and yeah, that's it. So it's an awful nice port. It is an awful nice port. Like anything, you can improve on it. I mean, you could actually just, you can sleeve this with a tube, okay? You can JB weld it in place, and you can port till you hit through that tube. But usually I like getting rid of that. But yeah, that's another video. And this engine doesn't need it, so I'll leave that for another time. That's where I'm at. Now I gotta put my phone in the refrigerator. It's getting hot. think I'm joking about, thought I was joking about putting my phone in the freezer. Nope. Lens keeps fogging up now. We'll see how this goes. Yeah, it's probably the cleanest that lens has been in a while. All right, so we're all cleaned up. I'm going to check this lens periodically. Move it one more time. Attempt to get it out of the way. So that's all cleaned and acetoned, cleaned, acetoned. These are screwed in, and I use the 272 Loctite mixed with the thread sealer, the 565. I mix it. It's like pink thread sealer, and I screw the studs in. Studs are rotated half a turn out from bottomed out. Got my Cometic gasket. Oh, all right, more stickers. Yeah. Line the dolls up. Yep. Gasket's on. And I don't put any lube on there till after I put the cylinder head on, so this will go on. These are like extremely light. See what I mean by the head not slamming down on the gasket? You just have more control that way. Having the engine propped up. Doesn't work quite as well when the bench is in there. There you go. I'll keep doing this until it doesn't spin. This way I know that the gasket is collapsed and I can start my forking procedure. I'll let that sit and then start the next procedure. I already went over it a couple more times. Now it's time to step it up to 70. And now we do 110 foot-pounds. So basically you have to push 110 pounds of pressure on this torque wrench, so it might tilt the engine over. You just got to stabilize it. So this is basically 110 foot-pounds. Just got to make sure you stabilize the engine while you do it, because it's a lot of pressure and you don't want to fall. And I'll just go over it again. Now, I will say this. When you're torquing these, you want to make sure, when you're torquing, say this nut right here, you don't want to be pulling up on it, because what's happening is you're putting pressure on this valve spring. So always do your torque away from the springs, okay? You don't want to be torquing up here because you're putting pressure on that valve. Yeah. Okay. It's a hot one today. Was it 110 in the shop? 110 degrees in here.